Welcome to the ExEm podcast. Here is your host, mental health therapist, Matthew Knabe.
I am very hard on myself, dealt with severe anxiety.
And it made me feel like a monster. I didn't have the energy to care.
There was just nothing more but to face what I had been running from.
I'm already an anxiety-filled mess.
It's just love. Like, it just goes back to love.
So, truth be told, it's been a little while since the last ExEm podcast came out. And today we're going to get into a little bit of why. And today's episode is a little bit different because the tables get turned on me. And we are going to hear a little bit about my journey and my story and a little bit about what's going on not only in the past year with some of my health issues, but going back to things that I've referenced on the podcast before, things that I've done previous in my life before becoming a mental health therapist, and kind of going into a little bit of a journey talking about my story. So today on the podcast, well, I'm the guest. And I have a colleague of mine, Gary Underwood, who has come to me and asked, Matt, have you ever shared your story on the podcast? I said, well, probably a little bit here and there, but so today he's going to interview me. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, Gary Underwood interviewing me.
All right, Matt, this is your turn. You're used to being in the position of interviewing and asking questions and caring about how can we learn today as an audience. Today it's not a hot seat. We're glad to get some time specifically to hear your story, Matt. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you, Gary.
Sure.
You came to me recently and talked about had I ever been interviewed on the podcast, and obviously I've been doing a majority of the interviewing. I've put a couple of the times where I've spoken publicly, but really haven't got into, who is this guy that keeps putting these podcasts out? So it'll be interesting. I feel a little bit on the other side of this for sure. So yeah.
Well, very healthy because, like, as a part of Emerge Experience, ExEm, like, people hear your voice as the constant, and some of them know you and know your heart as a personal friend or family member, and some maybe we feel like that because we've listened and we've worked through some difficult things with you, and now a chance to really get to know personally some things you've been walking through, and I appreciate your openness to go in there because I know at times, like you said, it's not about me, right? But at the same time, we are grateful for your heart and your willingness to probe into some deep issues, and even today to kind of share some stuff you've been through, very difficult stuff, like with your own health, and it's not just you can give us like some background what you've been through physically, but also how that's kind of pushed to levels of stress or concern or worry or prayer, like things that, as we go through something in life, it hits us on different levels. So I appreciate your willingness to take us on the journey, Matt. Like, give us the big headline, maybe start with a year ago. Was it a year ago that you started having some serious heart issues? Yeah.
So starting with the physical issues, it actually started in 2020.
Oh, wow.
And I haven't really publicly shared this. And, it was the beginning of 2020. It was right around the shutdown that I started experiencing some chest pain. And initially, it wasn't like excruciating, but it was definitely something like this isn't normal. And I think it was a strange time to develop chest pain because the world went into a shutdown. So all of my doctor's appointments were virtual.
Right.
And so I think it's very hard to diagnose what might have been going on with me because we were doing all of these appointments, essentially me being from home. And so very quickly I got diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. I mean, the world goes into a shutdown. I'm a mental health therapist. My client load exploded. The issues that I was dealing with were, I'd never been in a pandemic before. So, if I was struggling, I can only imagine that my clients were struggling. So it was pretty simple for, my doctors and myself to kind of lean into this idea that, well, this is probably an anxiety issue. And I believed that. And for a while, I thought, well, I've just got to, do the things I'm telling my clients to do and kind of work through that. And the problem was they put me on some anxiety medications. We tried a bunch of different things, and nothing was causing the chest pain to go away. And so that started to kind of give me a little bit of a red flag that, usually being on some type of medication, I would have seen a reduction of those types of symptoms. And that didn't happen. And a year went by, and it was like, at that point I was kind of like, I do anxiety for a living. Like I'm pretty aware of what anxiety is. And in my body started telling me there's something else going on. And it was a difficult process. And, I know a lot of my doctors, they weren't finding anything, but I don't know that they were doing the right tests. And the process of that became difficult because the chest pain increasingly got worse. So 2021, 2022, and it was almost on a pretty regular daily basis. At some point in the day, for at least a couple hours, I would go into these heart attack type episodes, and it just continued. And then, it was about a year ago that I was talking with a good friend of mine, and he and I were having a conversation. I was just like, I've been navigating this for 3 years, and I don't feel like I'm getting any answers. And he connected me with another buddy of mine who works with all the cardiologists in the area. And long story short, he got me on the phone with my current cardiologist, and they had me in the office. I think it was within 24 hours, because when I explained my symptoms, they were very, very concerned. So that was kind of where we're at a year ago. I know we're diving. We just dove right into, but there's a lot, and we'll get into what happened since then. But that's kind of where I was till up to last year.
Just the whole what's going on in your mind and thoughts, because obviously something more than anxiety is going on, something heart related, but also that can cause additional anxiety, like things like worry. What on earth is going? Like nothing I'm taking. Nobody seems to really know. Yeah, and like you said, sometimes they might be doing the wrong test. So how are you feeling, just mentally along this way with the I don't know?
Yeah, I told several doctors I do have anxiety. I have anxiety because my chest hurts so bad.
Right.
And so it would definitely increase my anxiety when I would go through these episodes, oftentimes, in the afternoons, and trying to manage that between clients or between meetings or, stuff that I was doing. And, there were times I'd have to come into my office and close the door and just lay down on the ground in complete silence for like sometimes 35, 45, sometimes an hour. And my schedule. It's like finding an hour every day to be able to, get this stuff to calm down was nearly impossible. I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of, things outside of work, and that anxiety of, is that going to happen if I walk on stage and I'm addressing a congregation or a group of people on a topic? And it definitely becomes, something that starts to control your life, because you worry about everything you do. Everywhere you go, it's like, should we go out to dinner tonight? I'd rather not, because I don't want it to happen in a restaurant. It would be concerning. I'm a big part of our worship team at church. It happened many times. I can't count how many times it would happen that a Sunday morning I'm on stage and it's like I can feel it coming on, and it's like, oh man, this is going to go south real quick. So, I mean, it definitely, and I've talked about this probably on the podcast before, that, anxiety is a big part of my journey, and I'm totally open with talking about it, because God used anxiety to get me into the mental health field. And, if anybody tells you they're a mental health therapist and they haven't had issues with mental health, I have a hard time believing it. I'm sure there are out there, but, years and years and years and years ago, I was, a touring musician and was, doing a completely different career in a completely different world.
And we want to hear about that for sure. I want to hear for sure about that
we can talk
for a minute. And maybe you could say like what ultimately was diagnosed as far, over the last 9 months
Yeah.
about your heart and for your friends in the audience too, like what maybe do they need to know and how can we pray for you? Because it's obviously anxiety a major thing, but this is a different, I mean, it's more.
So what was diagnosed was we found that when I talked to that cardiologist, he brought me in, they'd done some tests that really gave us some information, and we found out that I had a genetic issue, and I had a 100% blocked main artery to my heart, and I was living on borrowed time. And it could have been, some people refer to it as a widowmaker. It was the potential for the big one, and I had 100% blockage. Interestingly enough, my mom had the same surgery yesterday. Other members of my family have been looking into if they have the same thing and some life changes or medication things that they may be able to do to not get to the point that I was. But yeah, it was that's what it was. And then after I had the surgery last September, there were a lot of extremely rare. I'm like an anomaly side effects that happened. And so after the surgery, I developed an issue called pericarditis, which is interestingly becoming more and more common. I've been reading a ton about it. It wasn't a word that was really on my radar prior to the last year or so, and now I see it in the news all the time. And
is that like an inflammation of the pericardium?
That's exactly right.
But I forget what the pericardium is.
Yeah,
I've heard it before. But
it's the sac around the heart that holds fluid and stuff like that. And that the pericarditis. I had a complete enclosed artery to the heart. And so for 3-4 years, I was having chest pains or whatever. Pericarditis exponentially was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. And I've explained to people sometimes that pericarditis it feels like someone's jabbing a knife into your heart and they just don't stop. And unfortunately, the pericarditis has had me hospitalized 4 times. Well, technically, I'm sorry, 3 times this past year. And then I was recently, a couple weeks ago, had to go in again. But that was, I thought was because of pericarditis, but it was actually because of a medication, I believe. We're getting closer and closer to understanding, but I believe a medication that was causing me issues with my esophagus and potential stomach. So, man, it's been an insane journey.
Yeah,
I'm not completely out of the woods either. We're having this podcast right now, and I'm talking as if it's behind me.
This is in real time. Often people, it's after everything seems all better that we hear the story. Yeah. But you guys in the listening audience, this is Matt. Right now, some of the burdens that he's carried as someone who's used to being in the position of listening and caring for others and diagnosing or offering help or wisdom or guidance. Has it been hard to be like, no, I got to focus on me a little bit more here than I have both maybe physically with habits or checkups or even just what happened a couple weeks ago. I know that's weighed heavily on you.
Yeah, for sure. It's similar to the moment when you're on an airplane and the flight attendant talks about you need to put the oxygen mask on yourself to be able to take care of the people around you.
Yeah.
Like if you're not taking care of yourself and if you're not able to operate, you're not really in a position to be really helping others. And so, I think this has been a very difficult journey of getting myself healthy again and, getting to a place where I'm able to, do the things that I've, feel like I should be able to do, especially at my age. And, having 2 young kids that, are still dependent on a, active dad and stuff like that. So a lot of those things have kind of played into my mind and stuff like that. And, I've just been as smart as I can be with all of this stuff, and probably a little bit more, I say this tongue in cheek, but neurotic with, what I do with my time, what I do with the food that I eat. I was pretty neurotic before this event.
This is
but this
next
is
level.
like, being mindful of what what kind of food I'm putting into my body, what kind of exercise I'm getting. If there's clients of mine that are listening, they know I talk about sleep regimen all the time. I talk about, are we eating food, or are we eating stuff that's not really food? Like, those things are really important to me, especially knowing that I have a genetic issue, that there are things that we eat that my body can't process. And so I know that now. I didn't know that before, but I know that now, and know that I have to be very careful of what I do put into the body. So, a lot of those things have changed, but, I still feel that we're called, to be the body of Christ and serve. And so I've not let go of that by any means, but it's just been hard. It's been a lot harder this year than any other time.
Complete hijacking of what you thought these last few months would be like, and last few years, for sure.
But Gary, I'll tell you this, and this isn't because I have anything figured out, because I don't know that I do or not. But, there are times through this past year where I would say, I battled with, moments of depression, because there were times there was like, I don't know if this is going to go away. There were times right before, in November, I had a second operation that I had a moment with my father-in-law and my dad lying on the operation table, looking at them saying, I don't want to die. And there was, concerns in my first hospital stay after my original surgery. This is kind of an interesting moment or tidbit that, I didn't know the severity of what I was in. It was like, okay, we're just going to go and get this fixed. And then a doctor came in and said, do you have your life in order? And I was like, well, like, as far as like my house, like, it's pretty clean. I've got my sock drawers in order. My closet's kind of in order. No. Like, if you don't make it out of the hospital. And I'm like, I'm sorry. And my wife
your will and testament,
yes, exactly. Like, do you have
said
everything?
What you need.
Yeah. So I just kind of looked at him and I'm like, oh, this got real. And my wife's standing there and she kind of looks at me and she goes, oh, could you die from this? And he goes, well, there's always a chance you might not make it out of the hospital. And I was like, holy cow.
Do you feel like you were in some weird movie?
Yes.
Like some weird,
yes.
What is going on, man?
Yeah, it was surreal. And just, kind of going through that, But my point in that is going, I think when you deal with life situations like that, you have one of two ways to go. And for whatever reason, and maybe because the place I'm in life, the place I'm at in life, and the experiences I've had, I just leaned into God. And I can tell you, and I'm sure this was part of God's plan, that since last August, September, my spiritual life has grown exponentially because I had to be so dependent on God, where I don't know that I've ever had to be that dependent, because it was like every day was like, could I die today? Am I going to be able to function today? Can I do my job today? Can I be a dad today? And there were days where the answer was no.
Yeah.
The answer was, I cannot function. And, I'm relatively still a young guy. So it's like, that's a hard pill to swallow when you've got, community group members mowing your lawn and your neighbor coming over to shovel your driveway and people bringing meals. And, the outpouring was incredible of the inner circle people that we have in our lives.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
But it was a moment where I feel like, and I know we'll talk a little bit, but like where God kind of brought me to my knees a little bit, probably for the second time in my life, where it was like, I want you to realize that this is about me and it's not about you. And it's not through the power that you're able to do all of these things that you're doing. I'll tell you, over the last 8, 9, 10 months, I've just been able to kind of go, okay. And I let go and just relinquish that. And that, if anything, sidebar, my heart is very healthy right now. So
okay, yeah, we were all wondering if you were going to say like, how's his heart actually doing right now?
My heart is good. I'm still.
You're not in the emergency room right now.
I'm not right now, and my heart is good, and that's very encouraging. And I think that through this process, God sent me through this for a lot of reasons that have allowed me to grow spiritually. I talk about spiritual wisdom a lot, and I feel like God has grown areas of my life in that as well, and to be even more dependent on Him than I was before.
And so this would be that moment that maybe you're used to being on this end of the podcast.
Yeah.
Going like, well, tell us more about that. Like when you say, I leaned into God, or I was more dependent on God.
Yeah.
I'm used to hearing Christians or believers or people of faith, whatever, like I was going through this hard thing, but God helped me through it.
Yeah.
And they often don't give what did that really
that's a great question.
Like? And because I know there's a lot of real, raw fear potentially of what and when is this going to like take my life?
Yeah.
Anger, like why me? Why my kid's kid's dad or my wife's husband? Like why?
Yeah.
Why now? Like, and not that means you're entitled to God answering you in your time, but I could see being raw. What the heck? Like very frustrated. So in real time, what does that look like? What did that look like for you and God?
Well, I think you said it. I think a lot of things is I think a lot of the way we navigate these types of situations, we have choices. And I could have chose to be bitter. I could have chose to pull away from God. I could have chose to be angry. And the thing is I think sometimes we have to move into acceptance and adapt. And I feel like that's one of the biggest things that I've done over the last year is going, this is my reality. This is happening. And I have to accept that. And I'm not blaming God for that. I do believe we live in a fallen, broken world. And I am not excused of that. And so therefore I know my body is going to begin to fall apart
at some point, one way or another.
Right, and these things are
hope
part
it's not now,
for sure. And so, I think when I've gone through life's difficulties at other times in my life, and been through a lot of adversities. I've shared a lot on the podcast about my wife and my journey with infertility and miscarriages. That was a massive one. That was years and years of, but I think through that and then through my journey in the music industry that led me, out of the music industry, that was another time in my late 20s, early 30s that God kind of brought me to my knees. This one, it was kind of like immediately of going, okay, God, we're going to do this together, versus trying to wrestle with Him. Like I really wrestled with the music industry in my 20s, 30s, early 30s. I really wrestled with Him with the infertility and the miscarriages. I mean, it was like, we're going to duke it out, bud. Like let's, and we had that. And not that God doesn't want that sometimes. I think He's okay with us wrestling with Him.
Absolutely. Like read the Psalms and see David's wrestling, and that's part of what's legacy of prayer that's been passed on to us. But I think it's cool that you can look back on your life map, your life timeline, and say, hey, I remember that hard time, or I remember God bringing me through in ways that I couldn't foresee, or He said no to this hope I really had, and it hurt at the time, but man, looking back, it was the best thing for me. So it sounds like you were able to trust in, okay, I've seen Him, you know what I'm saying? I know how He operates. We've been through some stuff before.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking for peace and joy? Do you want to refresh your life and raise your well-being? You need Create Harmony. At Create Harmony, we focus on everyday joys and we savor life's blessings. Our episodes are filled with creativity and fun, and we believe in setting an intentional rhythm. Listen in to Create Harmony to learn how to use your imagination as a way of listening to God and remind yourself how to notice goodness all around you.
Yeah, and knowing that, again, I keep saying I don't have it all figured out because I talk to guys that are in, 20, 30 years down the road ahead of me, and I hear things that they're talking about, and I'm like, oh man, that wasn't even on my radar. But at this phase in my life, dealing with this physical ailment, I feel like there really wasn't that moment where I resisted or wanted to pull away from God. It was like, okay, this is happening. I've talked about this on the podcast with two other buddies of mine. I'm in the Word every day with them. I'm praying all the time. But, there's times in my life when you're going through difficult stuff and you're like, I'm not going to read today, and I'm not going to pray today. I'm not going to. For me, and through this circumstance, it was like, I want more of God. I want to lean. That's what I mean by leaning into it. It's like, I get it. I mean, for 4 years, I've dealt with chronic pain. Now, I know that there are people that are listening and people on this planet who have been dealing with chronic pain for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And I'm not saying that I can understand, or, my mom's one of those people. She's dealt with chronic pain for the last 30, 40 years. But I have a better insight into how defeating that can be on a daily basis, and how you can become bitter, and how you can become angry. And I get it.
And shut God out. Like,
For
I remember
sure.
Jesus walking up to this guy by the healing pool, had been sitting there for
That's
decades, and he's like, do you want to get well?
Yeah.
Like, have you completely given up? I wouldn't blame you if you did. Like, that's the other part of this. It's not like you had one surgery or something and it's back to normal, or it's back to whatever you hoped you'd feel like. This is a daily, it's a longer term thing, and you don't have a timeline for things feeling better.
That's it.
Physically.
Yeah. I think that's, I say that with understanding that, sometimes it takes a long time for people to get there. I also understand it was happening to me. I think it would be different if this was happening to my wife, or if it's happening to one of my kids or something like that. It's like there's a way to accept. It's like, I can accept that. But there's, the daily battles of fear. I say this all the time too. It's like God says 365 times in Scripture, "Do not fear." It's hard to do that when you're waking up one day and you're like, "Am I going to die today? Like, is today the day that's going to happen?" And
that feeling of my heart being stabbed is not going away.
It's not going away.
It's still here.
Yeah. To be completely transparent, Gary, so today is a Wednesday. I don't know exactly when this podcast is coming out. But today is a Wednesday. Monday, 2 days ago, was the first day in 4 years I've had no chest pain. And Sunday I had not severe, but it was significant, and I had some minor chest pain last night. So that's why I say I'm not out of the woods.
Right.
But I think the chest pain is related to other things in relationship to the journey I've been on, from surgery to pericarditis to medications that I have to be on, where all of the tests that we're doing is showing us your heart's healthy, your chest pains are coming because of all of these side effects of all of the things that we had to do.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive a little bit more deeply into moments in the past in your life where you said sort of, God got my attention, or like I've been through something difficult and I've seen God move in my life in a unique way. Like at some point, maybe you could give us your basic story of when God became more than just, hey, I believe that a supreme being exists, or I believe that the Bible is true, or something. Like when would you say God became a priority in your life relationally?
Yeah. So, I'll make it brief, but, my story is the prodigal son. I mean, I relate to that on so many levels, and grew up in a very strong Christian home, was very connected to our church, was a relatively young leader in Young Life, which is an organization that really helped me grow the foundation of my faith.
Did you go to Stowe, or was it Hudson?
It was Hudson at the time.
Okay, I know they're bitter enemies at times, so just trying to see where you stand. Go ahead.
No. So really kind of developed a foundation of faith and was living it out and had a relationship with God. And then you and I talked a little bit about this before, but I was a late teen, 19-year-old, and got a huge opportunity to do something in the music industry in one of the biggest Christian bands, of the late 90s, early 2000s. And
does this mean you're not going to say the name of the band on the podcast?
We can.
Because I think it's so cool. Because I remember coming out of Grace College in the late 90s and listening to
Sonic
probably
Flood.
Sonic Flood.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of things that came to fruition to get me to that point. And I had started touring and regionally. I think I was probably 14 or 15, and in a high school band. Still great friends with those guys.
What were they called?
We were called Purge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Purge.
Purge. Yeah.
Sounds like a fun dystopian movie series.
Yeah, I love. It was a great time in my life, and I did that.
But that's cool.
Through high school into my freshman year of college, and then an opportunity came up to move to Nashville, and was connected with some of the Goatee Records people. And
what did you play? And I know you've got a great voice.
I was a singer, but I played a lot of guitar, and so essentially I was the hired gun guitar player for Sonic Flood. And in return of me touring with them to play guitar, two of the guys in Sonic Flood produced my solo record.
Awesome.
Where I sang and played everything on. So did that for a while, and then I really struggled with the Christian music industry at that time, and it's been well documented that the late 90s, early 2000s was kind of a heyday for the Christian music industry because it blew up. I mean, it just was like, it became a monster. And so bands were now as big or sometimes bigger than the secular acts out there. And the money was coming in, and these major record deals were coming in. And so it was tough being a 20-year-old trying to digest that.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff I saw on the road that, growing up in a Christian home, I was allowed to listen to Christian music. A lot of the secular music I wasn't maybe allowed to listen to as much. And then now I'm touring with these guys and going, this is not what I thought it was. In that process, probably made a lot of poor decisions on my own and said, well, if we're going to do this in the Christian industry, I don't want to be a fake. And I left. I left the Christian industry and I went into the secular music industry and started a whole other journey. And that's really probably the beginning of my prodigal journey was, I don't think I ever lost my faith, but I became way less dependent on God. I wasn't spending time with him. I was, getting pulled into, when I moved into the secular industry, it didn't take very long that, within a couple of years, I was playing with some of the biggest bands in the world and living that life, in my early mid 20s, just kind of going, this is what it is. And
for you, was that some of that a dream come true, like as a musician and feeling like everything is
for sure. So, I'm traveling all over the place, getting to see cultures, getting to experience things, playing new venues every night, playing with some of the greatest musicians, ever.
Some of our listeners would recognize their names too.
Yeah. When I tell my stories, I try my best not to name drop because it just,
Guys, listeners, I'm looking at Matt right now, like seeing how much do I push him to tell us about things. Right. But no, seriously, you had everything that a young musician could want. And it sounds like you're getting to a point where you realize, hey, this is not ultimately going to fulfill me. Something happened.
Yeah. Well, everything changed. It started to get very dark. And what I mean by that is over the time I was in the music industry, and I think this number's right. It might have grown because I keep using this number, but now I feel like the number's grown. But, there was about 13 overdoses or suicides that were friends, people I toured with, people I knew that I was like starting to get overwhelmed with that. Addiction was running crazy. And it was just interesting because, I'm in now my mid-late 20s and touring with guys that are, super successful in their 40s. And I'm like, these guys are miserable. Like their marriages aren't successful. A lot of them were dealing with addiction issues. And for like 2 hours every night, 25,000 people would be worshiping them, whatever. And then the remainder of the 22 hours, they would just live in this misery. And I'm like, do I want my life to look like that in 20 years from now? And also, I had a huge desire to get married. My wife and I dated through high school, and as soon as I got the Sonic Flag gig, she didn't want that life, and we broke up. And I knew I wanted to be married, but I was like, I don't think a way to start a marriage is me being on the road for 250 days a year.
They say the road ain't no place to start a family.
That's right.
I've heard that somewhere.
I've heard that somewhere.
That's right.
And so I started seeing the signs. And to be honest with you, it was 2008. The economy crashed. Touring was the way we made our living, and half our record label went under. And I just knew it. There was some issues internally with the band I was playing in that I loved so much. And I fought for 2 more years till 2010, but the writing had been on the wall that I knew it. I could feel it in my soul that God's going, you're done. I know you've been doing this since you were 14, but you're done. And in that process, it was 2010 that I was just broken. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I ended up moving back to Cleveland, Ohio, or Akron, Ohio, or whatever.
And Matt, sorry to interrupt you. Would you say that season was for you a death of a dream because it wasn't what you thought it was going to be? Or would you say, no, it was actually the emergence of a dream within to have like a family, to be married, like you said, and I can't do both and be healthy.
Yeah, I knew that. And it wasn't the death of a dream as much as it was, I looked at the things I set out to do and I accomplished them. Like I'd done major tours. I saw my band on MTV. I'd heard my record on the radio. I walked into a Walmart and Target and bought my album. I'd played in front of, we played one show one night in front of 50,000 people.
Wow.
It's like you started, I signed a major record deal. It's like you start going through it and I'm like going, I've done all of it. And now I'm at a place where I feel like I'm ready to transition. And here's where my issue came in. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know I didn't feel like I had any skill whatsoever because I'd only been doing the same thing since I was about 14 years old. And that's what led to my anxiety issue. My anxiety issue, which brought me back to Ohio, is I developed an anxiety and panic disorder, which I talk about all the time. I think it's important for us to talk about and can I normalize.
Can I ask, was any of that financial? Because you're like, how am I going to provide? Okay. Okay. Any of that, but some of it could also be, hey, I had this adrenaline rush every time I'd get on a stage and now I don't. What am I going to do to find that fulfillment?
And my identity was in, being a front man for a rock band. Yeah. How do you go from being a rock band to a, desk job? Yeah. And I don't have the skills to even do the desk job, So, it was like, what am I going to do now? I knew I had to get out because I just knew that I couldn't lose more friends. I couldn't deal with the industry anymore. It was getting to the point where I felt like it was Groundhog Day. I was getting to the point where I was saying, and this is kind of cliche, but it's true. Hey, how's it going in Chicago? And then somebody's like, "You're in Detroit," and it's like, that was a reality for me where it was like, every day it's like, it is
now, Groundhog Day.
It is, and there were things about it I loved or whatever. And people ask me, "Do you miss it?" There's parts I certainly miss all the time.
Well, and I was going to ask that, like it's fascinating to me that you at one point in life were a part of a group or part of a band, and on any given night, like you said, there would be thousands of people that would be excited by the music you played, by the show, all that stuff. And now here you are in a role at Emerge as a counselor who often it's you in a room with one person. Yeah. And you can't make them change or do anything. You can't make them stand up and sing along with the song. Sure. Like it's just It is a radical transformation of how God is using you, and it's exciting. But how did you land on, okay, here's something I might be called to next? Yeah.
So the first thing is I got into music because I had a heart for people who didn't feel like they had a place or felt disconnected or felt like they were alienated. And the band, the main band that I was in was called Legion, Ligion. It's religion without the RE. And that was bringing the masses back together. And it's gathering the masses. And that was the whole point of the band was giving a place for people who felt ostracized, a place where they were welcome. And that was our audience. And so, coming back to Ohio in 2010, I got into therapy. And I spent a year in therapy. And it's funny, you and I are doing this podcast right now. In this office, I was a client in this office. So,
So you just Googled therapy and picked up the phone and called them?
No, my parents worked it out because they knew I was in bad shape.
Okay.
And so when I came home,
They make you go? Was it like, if you're going to live at home?
Yeah, because I was in bad shape. I had not left. My brother and I lived downtown Nashville. I had not left that apartment that we lived in a condo right downtown for 2 months, 3 months. Like it was, and then when I got to Ohio, it took me about another 2 or 3 months to get out of my parents' house to come here. And I spent a year in therapy and really did a lot of work and really appreciated my therapist and worked through a lot of the anxiety and ended up in that time connecting with Nike and developed into a director of operations role over a 7-year period that I moved back home. And but the interesting part of the story is I remember being in this office the last day of therapy. My therapist asked me, he said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, I don't really know. And he goes, "I think you should do what I do." And that was the moment the light bulb went off. And I was like, well, I'm not singing at the clients, and I'm but it's people who need to feel connected. Yeah. And it's like all the skills I had and I used to say this all the time, when I would walk on stage, within the first 30 seconds of us starting our set, I would build a bridge from the stage to the audience, inviting them to be a part of something, whether they knew it or not. And I did the same thing in therapy. And sometimes people just need to feel connected. And so I went back, got my master's degree, and continued working at Nike while I was getting my master's degree. And when I graduated with my master's degree, there was no other place on the planet that I wanted to go and work. And that was Emerge.
Wow.
And that was almost 7 years ago that I came here as a therapist and did several years just doing therapeutic work. And then a couple years ago, an opportunity came up to do some more leadership type things. And I moved into what we would consider a coordinator role and did that for a little while. And then in my time at Nike, I was a director of operations and did that and thought, never in my life will I use this again because I'm going to go in to be a therapist.
Right.
And then
now,
about almost the same time that my heart issues got diagnosed last summer, our president, Dr. Crosby, came to me and he said, "Listen, I'm really thinking about, you moving into a director of operations role." And I'm like, how serendipitous is this? Like, I never thought I would use those skills. Again,
it's like somebody had all these plans and possibilities.
So now I use all of those stories I just shared with you in the role that I'm at now and what I'm doing here at Emerge. And I use all of them. All of those things have come together. And, it's been pretty incredible now sitting in my office as a director of operations. I still do some clinical work, not nearly as much, but just remembering that much younger version of myself actually sitting in the seat that you're sitting in right now.
Maybe I should be a therapist, Matt.
Maybe it's your time, Gary. So
sit here long enough.
That's right.
Oh, man. Well, I don't know how many of the listeners realize you guys, Matt, as the voice of the podcast and kind of helping us learn from other guests and experts or people sharing their testimonies and things. But it's great to get into your story, into your heart, not just your spiritual, but your physical heart too right now, and some real-time things that are going on with you. But yeah, Emerge is blessed by your heart for people and by your leadership perspective to not just see the person sitting across the room on the couch and say, how can I encourage this person? Maybe God's done something in my life that I can use as you are to help them. Yeah. But also to think through the whole team. You guys, we have a whole team of clinicians, counselors specialists, not just here in Akron, but in Pennsylvania, and just exciting how God has grown this place over 50 years, and the possibilities that now you with vision and leadership and excitement are able to bring to this team and stuff. It's exciting to see. But behind the scenes, you're a real guy with real struggles,
for sure,
and real pain.
Yeah.
And so, like, maybe give us a closing thought or two to encourage. Maybe there's a listener that identified with, oh man, I'm going through something right now that's just chronic, that's lingering, like you've got right now. What would you say to someone in that place?
I would say you're not alone. I know there were times where I would get in my own head and feel like, I'm the only one going through this, and I'm the only one experiencing this type of stuff, and there's no way out of this. And Henry Cloud, who's an author and just guy I appreciate. He said in one of his books, he said that it's God uses His people to help His people.
Yeah.
And if this story is impactful in any way, I think it's important for us to know that life brings adversities, and life is like storms. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And all of us experience that. And it's through the storms. I can tell you right now, I am a better version of myself today than I was last August. And it's because of the trials and the adversities and the struggles that I've gone through to get to this side. Now, I know that journey's not over, but I know I was able to navigate this adversity in a healthier way than I was the one my wife and I went through years ago with infertility. And then the one that I went through years and years before that of leaving an industry that I loved
right.
And so every time I face these things, I'm able to pull from those things. And so, if somebody's listening, I just want to say that you're cared for, you're loved. And, I think that being steadfast and being in prayer is so important, and leaning into God. I think a lot of times the dangerous thing and the way I think the enemy can really get into our lives is when we start withdrawing and pulling away. And but Gary, I want to mention this, and then we'll wrap. But it's I love this ministry. I really, really do, and I think people know that. But this place changed my life for the better. Like, I would not be in the marriage or the dad or have the kids that I have or the life if it wasn't for that pivotal transition year from 2010 to 2011 that I was able to get to a point to kind of go, I can't do this on my own. I need to go get help. And it opened. There was probably a lot of pride issues in my life prior to that, because that was never on my radar. It was like, only people who are weak go to therapy. But I really do, and that is why I am here. And I've said this, many times before, that I truly, truly believe in this ministry and the impact that it's had on thousands, if not more, people over the last 50 years. And to be a part of the next generation of the next 50 years has been so exciting to me, and such an honor to see, how God has just opened up opportunities and doors here, that now I'm part of the team that you're on as well, that is making a lot of these decisions about, okay, where does Emerge go from here? So it's a huge honor and a huge blessing, and to be able to do this podcast has been really great. And dude, really great job doing my job.
Thank you. Thanks. I was a little nervous
can't have
being a rookie podcaster. And, well, I think the other thing is a reminder that everybody's carrying some challenge, some burden. Like, just because you're on the other side of a counselor conversation, guys, the counselor, the leader, the CEO, the director, the person that looks like they've got it all together, or the person that you think you want to be someday, they're still going to have some troubles. They still got some pain they're carrying around. And you, certainly your relationship with God, you referred several times to the community around you. Yeah. Even right now, the guys that you read the Bible and pray with, or the people that you and your wife have been able to be real with and get support from and help with things around the house when there have been some health setbacks for you, like the community. Guys, don't withdraw from community. That's the time when you need to lean in, and we say that phrase, lean in, but really invest in relationships, because you need them and they need you.
That's right.
And pride would keep you from initiating, but just go be with people. Find your pain partners, your friends.
That's good. And so I'm going to throw out a little promotion that we're going to do you and I will do another podcast very, very soon. And we'll get to know Gary a little bit more, because he's one of our newer team members, and excited to have my interviewer job position back. But we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is super important, and that is church wounds. And so after this podcast comes out, be looking out for the reverse, where you're going to be
forward
on the
to it,
hot
Nike
seat.
man.
Yeah,
looking forward to it.
Well, dude, thanks. Thank you. Appreciate
Absolutely, it's a privilege to be on the same team with you. And to the listeners of ExEm, thank you guys so much for checking us out, and connect with us at emerge.org.
Well, thank you so much for listening and going along with me on this journey of my story, of what brought me into the mental health world, and then also the struggles and the adversities I've gone through over the past year. And the purpose of this, as I've said on the podcast many times before, is oftentimes it's through hearing other people's stories and experiences and journeys that help us navigate life, help us see the hope and opportunity that is in front of us. And oftentimes when we feel like we're the only ones going through whatever life is throwing at us, it becomes much more difficult to navigate and move through. And so I appreciate that. And hopefully today was helpful. Hopefully today something connected with you on some level. And that's what we do on the ExEm podcast. That was the reason we started this 5 seasons ago. Well, we thank you so much for listening. If you have more questions about Emerge, please go to emerge.org for any information around what we do as a nonprofit ministry that does counseling. Well, until next time, or when our Savior comes, God bless.